Alex again. Welcome to part 3 of the Cigarbox Ukulele series. I know it's been a really long time since the last one, but this happened. Just to give you an idea what's currently on, I put on hold just so I could do this. Yeah, that's right. See, I pre-recorded a bunch of these episodes so I can kind of like squeeze them in between, and I didn't realize that I had a bad cable. So I did like a couple hours of talking into a camera to myself, basically, because it didn't pick up any audio. It's pretty embarrassing since I'm an audio engineer, but I made a couple new cables and we're good now. So anyway, this is one of the nerdier episodes that are the kind of the thing that I like, because I get to do a whole bunch of research. I get to go online, see what people are talking about, like test what all the claims and the popular opinions are and see how they actually hold up. And then run a bunch of tests myself, actually get my hands dirty. So this is going to be a fairly nerdy episode, but I'll try to keep it light. There's degrees of nerdiness, so instead of taking it to a 10, we're going to keep it at like a 5. And the discussion du jour is torrefied wood. Anyone that's spent any time in the musical instrument and equipment business knows that they just love buzzwords and trends, because everybody's looking for that magical, brass nut or tremolo block that's going to just make their tone explode. I know that sounds a little bit cynical, but it gets tiresome. It's also one of those industries where there's a lot of fudge factors, and you can use words like resonance and sustain, just willy-nilly throw them all over, not qualify anything. There are also a whole lot of commonly accepted beliefs that just because they're repeated so many times, they're held as true. But this process is actually based in science. Now, the claims that spring from that, it doesn't naturally flow that those are true, but at least we can break down the process and then do some testing and see what's going on. So I figured this would be a good opportunity and like kind of a low risk to go ahead and try it out. Alright, first little background info. Now, this is Cigarbox Ukulele, so a lot of people use reappropriated parts for this, and I thought about using one of these wine rack type things from IKEA, and it's European birch, which would have done fine for the neck, but that was $4 whole. And for like half that, I could get a piece of maple from Home Depot, and if you've watched my other videos, you know that if you rummage through these bins a little bit, you can sometimes find a couple of nice flame pieces, so I just went with that option. I only needed about 2 feet of it, so that gave me plenty to experiment with for other things. And after cleaning it up, it looks pretty decent. Not exactly quadruple A flame, but, this is hard maple, so. Alright, on to the nerd stuff. So torrefaction, also known as roasted wood, tempered wood, annealed wood, caramelized wood, whatever. Point is that the wood is undergoing a type of pyrolysis. It's a Maillard reaction. And it has plenty of other uses in different industries like biomass heating pellets, decking wood, siding wood, I've seen some wood turners do it, etc., etc. Now, the claims are that it darkens the wood, it heightens the contrast so it's more exciting to look at, it makes the wood lighter, stiffer, harder, more resistant to moisture, more stable, and in terms of guitars, more resonant. At least that's what all the word on the street is, but we want to test that because we are trying to avoid bro science, also known as anecdotal evidence. So let's ditch the unicorn tears and pixie dust and get down to brass tacks. So the composition of hardwood more or less can be broken down into a couple of categories, the biggest being cellulose, next being hemicellulose, then lignin, extractives, and ash. Each of them plays a different role and have different properties, which we'll get into in detail, and they all react differently when subjected to heat. Here's a chart that shows the change of weight in wood when subjected to certain temperatures for a period of time. Now, it has each of the components breaking down as different curves, and as you can see, at the lower temperatures, the hemicellulose starts to go. The lignin is a much more gradual curve, and then cellulose tends to just kind of drop off at a much higher temperature. Now let's compare that to some of the generally accepted ways that you would do this process. Now, the stated treatment stages are keep it at a moderate temperature, dry for a long period of time, like 10s or 20s of hours. Then raise the temperature, add some moisture, and cook that for a shorter period of time. That's to improve your workability. But we also know that adding water lowers the TG, or glass transition temperature, and it tends to sharpen the transitions. So as a not particularly accurate example, I just drew a couple lines on here to show what that might look like. And in terms of time versus heat, we know that raising the heat lowers the amount of time that it takes for the reaction to occur. Here's some high school science right here. You're raising the energy level of the molecules and increasing the number of high-energy collisions, which in turn increases the percentage of collisions that exceed the threshold of activation energy for the particular reaction that you're looking for. And ideally, you want to keep that below the threshold of whatever the next reaction is on the ladder that may not be the desired result, like bursting into flames. But let's get back to those wood components real quickly and talk about what their roles are and their various physical properties as it relates to each other. Like we said before, the largest single component is going to be cellulose, which adds strength and reinforcement. It has fibers that run parallel in their orientation. It has a high degree of crystallinity or polymerization. It's mostly made out of glucose, and it has a rather high Young's modulus of over 130 GPa. That's also known in common terms as stiffness. Second largest component by percentage is hemicellulose, and that's the matrix or suspension that those cellulose fibers are held in. It's a lot less polymerized, it's as in amorphous. It's more soluble in water, and instead of just being glucose, it's also made of mannose, xylose, etc., a couple different types of sugars, and has a much, much lower Young's modulus of around 8 GPa. So if you're thinking of this in terms of like a fiber composite, like carbon fiber, think of cellulose as the aramid or glass fiber strands, and then hemicellulose as the epoxy resin binder or matrix. Then we come to lignin, which basically acts as like an interface or surface binder. It has even lower polymerization, but it does have strong covalent bonds with hemicellulose, as in they stick to each other on a chemical level as opposed to like a mechanical level or something like that. And it's even less stiff. It has a Young's modulus of around 4 GPa. So as you can see, the cellulose is what's adding most of the stiffness, and then the other two components are kind of holding everything together. And then that small sliver of the pie chart was just the extractives, which are basically all the other stuff. So it could be, resins and oils and that sort of thing. And those tend not to be water soluble. They tend to be soluble in like, acetone and alcohols and things like that. And then just an example of something that might be found in there, you would find, depending on what type of the year you cut the tree down, more or less sucrose. And we know when that heats up, it breaks down into glucose and to fructose. And fructose also breaks down at a much lower temperature than the glucose does. And we know that that glucose is the main component in cellulose. Now, why did I mention Young's modulus as opposed to all of the other engineering measurements I could have said? Well, stiffness is one of the claims of torrefied wood, which is why it's become very popular in necks, as well as in like roasted spruce tops for acoustic guitars and that sort of thing. That doesn't tell the whole story, because you need to know your stiffness to density. And that's actually what the process would be doing, would be making it slightly stiffer, but making it less dense. So you get something that would have what's called a higher specific stiffness. As an example, if we compare ABS, which is just a common plastic that's injection molded, you probably have many pieces of ABS within arm's reach right now. Steel, the Young's elastomodulus of steel is over 100 times more than ABS, but it's also more than 5 or 6 times more dense. So how much better or worse does that make steel compared to ABS plastic if weight is a consideration? Well, it's still better, but it's 20-25 times better, so not 100 times better. So enough of the nerd stuff, now let's just get down to roasting some wood. First, if you're going to try this at home, kids, take safety precautions. I have 2 different types of fire extinguishers, this not at all janky looking fume extractor, just to be safe. I have the battery-powered smoke alarms, several of them in this room, plus the hardwired smoke alarms, and then I also brought a carbon monoxide alarm and a regular smoke alarm to put kind of right next to the stove, just as an early warning thing, and opened all the windows so everything's well protected and ventilated. I don't have a rarefied vacuum-type environment that I can cook this in, so what I'm going to do is wrap it up like a potato in aluminum foil to kind of like cut down on the amount of oxygen that's in there, and I will wrap that and unwrap that at different stages to either let moisture out or keep air in or whatever. And definitely be opening the oven door, because yes, I am doing this in the oven, to let any combustible gases out and be sucked up by the filter and blown out the windows so they don't accumulate and blow up. So I took pictures of the entire process, but there's not really much to show other than me like peeking into an oven once an hour or so. So I'll explain what I did. I started at a moderate temperature, and then once an hour, I set an alarm, and when it went off, go in there, turn the heat up 50 degrees, and let it cook for another hour. And I kept doing that until I was at the max temperature of the oven. Then I let it cook for a while, added some water vapor, and then it cooked for a little bit longer. It wasn't an exact process, but I also wanted to get rid of some of the excess moisture content that might be in there, because it may be a little bit moist even though it's been sitting in a very dry environment for months. So now we get to unwrap it and see how our baked potato cooked. And as you can see right now, it's obviously darker than it was, and it did make the figure pop a little more. So I would say that part is confirmed. We'll see how much in a little bit. It did cook the ends a little bit more than the rest of the parts, but I think some of that is surface, and I'm just going to use this makeshift sanding block because I'm way too lazy to dig the sanding block out of my toolbox, and just see if I can scrub that off right there and even out the color a little bit. And as I suspected, that is mostly on the surface, and it just kind of came right out. But apart from the surface of the end pieces and some of the sides, the rest of it cooked fairly evenly, and I'm pretty happy with the results, at least aesthetically speaking. Laying that side by side with the uncooked wood, you can see what a drastic difference it made. I mean, that's night and day. So let's see how much our density dropped. Before we cooked it, it came out around like 280 grams, and then afterwards it came out at like 260 grams, which means we lost about like 7 or 8% of our total density. As far as dimensions go, across the face, we lost a little more than like 3/100ths of an inch, as well as about 1/100th of an inch of height. Lengthwise, we didn't really lose much at all going along the grain, and that makes sense considering the orientation of the fibers. I expected it to lose a little bit because this is, a curly maple, and we just barely lost a fraction of an inch. Now, I wasn't sure if this would magically flatten the wood somehow, or if it would take the slight imperfections as far as features and accentuate them, and it ends up that's what it did. The slight bend became more of a warp and a twist. But I was kind of hoping that it would, because that would give me an opportunity to test something else, which is water absorption. Now, if we were cooking away a lot of the solids, like the hemicellulose that is very sensitive to water absorption, and leaving the more hydrophobic components combined, then in theory, what I'm doing right here shouldn't really work. And what I'm doing is just one of the kind of ghetto ways that you can flatten out a board, at least like a thinner one, which is kind of clamp it on both sides so that it's laying flat on the bench, and then you're going to put a little bit of water on it to relax the fibers, and then heat it up, let it cool down, and then it should flatten it out a bit. And sometimes that can work miracles, so we'll see if it has any effect at all here. Now, I just went at it with this industrial heat gun, as you can see right here, and then I have an infrared thermometer that I use to check the surface temperature every now and again to make sure that I was heating it up nice and even. These thermometers aren't particularly accurate, especially in reflective surfaces, but it'll give you a pretty good idea of what's going on, just like in apples-to-apple sense, not like in ultimate sense. And then after I heated the surface up pretty good, I wet it down a little bit more and then made kind of like a little burrito out of the thing and heated that up as a chamber to try to get a little bit deeper into the grain and flatten it out. And the results are, well, it didn't really flatten out very much. It looks like it may have moved a little bit. I don't know if that's my imagination or not, but that's good because it means the wood is now pretty stable and that the additional water had very little effect on it. And I can also confirm that after you get a little bit of an oil finish on it, it looks very nice indeed. So to summarize, does it darken the wood? Yes. A little bit less so once you sand it down a bit, but it is darker throughout. Does it increase the contrast and the chatoyance? Yes, it appears to do that as well, as you can see with your own two eyeballs. Does it shrink? Yes, it does shrink a little bit, not so much along the grain, which is to be expected. Does it decrease the weight? Yes, it does. Does it increase the stiffness? Yes, it does. Does it increase the surface hardness? Yes, but I didn't show a test for that because all I could really do was like try to hacksaw a little piece off and see which one felt like it was a harder material, and, that doesn't translate very well to video. Does it increase the moisture resistance? Well, as the warping fix test shows, it appears to do that. It seems to be much more stable as well, but it does also exaggerate imperfections. So I don't think you can take a flat board, run it through, and then go ahead and use it straight away without replaning it. But I read your mind. What if you just want the characteristics of regular wood, but you kind of like that look? Well, I went ahead and I tried to burn the surface just to kind of caramelize it near the top with a heat gun, and this is the result. Here's what it looks like with a little bit of oil on it. Here's another angle with a harder light. And then this is what it looks like back and forth with the oiled part that was roasted with a heat gun, and then the part that was not roasted at all, also with an oil finish on that side. It's a pain in the butt to get even, but it is technically possible. So thanks for watching the video. Catch you in the next one. Until then, get out there and make something awesome.